Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session of healthy living and healthy eating. We are pleased to have with us today UCSD's top nutritionist, Erin Kukura, who's going to share with us how we can eat healthy in the holiday season. Thank you so very much, Erin. And I got such great feedback from your last presentation. We're just really pleased to have you with us. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, I'm really excited. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to the future presentations. So thank you again for having me and talking about the holidays, right? It's a different year for all of us. So talk about how to navigate that today. Let's see. So let me pull up. Alrighty. So, okay. And as previously too, we definitely will have time for questions at the end. So definitely you can always leave questions throughout if they come up, and then we can go over those and any other future ones at the end as well. So obviously we're talking about healthy living during the holiday season. It's, I think, already such a challenging time, typically a stressful time. And then with COVID, things are even more difficult, and the new shutdown that we're all in again for the next few weeks. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why dieting and deprivation typically backfire. There's a lot of focus on weight and food, especially around the holiday season and come the new year. So we'll kind of talk about ways to navigate that, and then what are healthy eating kind of tips and tricks during this time. And then we'll also touch on how to think about our immune function, given that this is the holiday season. COVID is surging even more, and just in general, this is usually when there's more types of illnesses. So we'll kind of touch on that, and then also how the holidays are different this year. So kind of briefly to revisit why dieting and deprivation don't work. I think it's really common, the messaging that we get around the holidays is really focused on, that there are all these amazing foods and foods that are tied to memories and tradition. But there's also a lot of focus on foods, on weight, weight gain, and then feeling like this sense of, come January 1st, we have to change things really drastically. And so just to kind of go over, we are dieting, restricting our intake. This really backfires. We tend to have increased thoughts about food. We also tend to be in this all or nothing, what's been documented as the what the hell effect. So the moment we do eat that cookie, we end up feeling like we eat all of the cookies, and even just anticipating. So even in the back of your mind, if you know that come January 1st, you're gonna change your eating patterns drastically, you're gonna tell yourself you can't eat dessert, that this actually sets us up for more overeating behaviors because we're anticipating that restriction is coming. So this is what's known as like the Last Supper mentality. We often see this where, what are you doing Sunday night if you're kind of planning to start a diet Monday morning? And then we also have what's known as primal hunger. So if we are really like not eating enough, our body is going to kind of take over and release hormones and sensations that cause us to seek out food. We tend to eat until we're more uncomfortably full. So it really just doesn't work, essentially. And so we see this cycle of restricting, deprivation, dieting, which ultimately leads to overeating, binge eating, and then our solution is to go back to restricting. So we kind of stay in this cycle. And then long-term effects of dieting, one, they're just not sustainable, right? We kind of hear that most New Year's resolutions, don't even last a month. It's the same thing with eating habits, and especially really restricted eating habits. We see that correlation between eating disorders and binge eating, overeating behaviors. And then long-term, we actually see changes physiologically. So more fat retention, more weight gain. And then this also causes much more damaging kind of emotional and psychological damages, such as worsening self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and all sorts of things. So we'll kind of talk about what are other things we can do instead of kind of having this thought of dieting, whether that's current or even thinking about kind of starting something come the new year. All right, so how do we then navigate eating and the holidays? So, I just want to recognize too that eating around the holidays, being around all these kinds of foods, it can be challenging for some individuals, certainly. Often at this time of year, in a normal year, we probably would have more social functions, and typically there's, everyone's sharing cookies and treats and all sorts of things. So it can definitely be a lot, and it can be overwhelming if this is kind of around us all of the time, and especially if we're already kind of struggling with our relationship with food. But I always want to just highlight that food, yes, it can be a part of our health and energy and fuel, but it also is something that oftentimes has memories, especially around the holidays. This is really a time that we eat certain foods for traditional, reasons, cultural, religious reasons. So it can kind of take on an even larger role, especially around the holiday time. These are foods that we kind of maybe only eat once or twice a year. So I just kind of want to normalize as well. Normal eating is under eating at times, it's overeating at times. There's no perfect way of eating. So really thinking about what foods and what way of eating is nourishing, is satisfying to you, enjoying foods, is kind of a way to balance it all together. So some things to kind of ask is, what do you want? Because a lot of times there's a lot of foods available. Even if you are just having a smaller meal at home, there can still be lots of options. And so I always think it's really important that we're asking ourselves, what actually sounds good, appetizing? Am I eating this just because it's here, or do I actually really enjoy it? I think Thanksgiving is a great example. I am not a fan of sweet potato casserole, but I love stuffing and mashed potatoes. So I always make sure to get those, but I'm maybe I'll take a bite of the sweet potato casserole, or maybe I'll just pass on it, depending on what it is. So again, really honoring and kind of eating in what way works best for you. So it's really important that we then give ourselves permission to say yes, especially if we around the holidays, again, there's a lot of messaging around food, and we hear a lot of times, if you eat this, this activity burns the same amount of calories. But we need to really kind of separate food a little bit and just give ourselves permission, enjoy the foods, permission to be satisfied. But we also need to give ourselves equally permission to say no, because I think a lot of challenges around eating, especially at holidays, is that there are a lot of foods, and some individuals are really sharing their love in the food. But we need to also honor our body and give ourselves permission to say no. If we really are fully content, satisfied, we can definitely say no, which I know for a lot of people is really, really hard. I'm still working on it. But there are definitely gracious ways that we can decline food. So, sometimes having something in mind is helpful, but even something as simple as just I'm feeling really satisfied, but I would love to take some as leftovers can work totally fine. So I think just kind of keeping that in mind, that we can always decline food. We don't have to eat in order to make someone else happy. So kind of removing some of that pressure, if that's anything that you experience, especially around the holidays when there's a lot of sharing and love and caring expressed through food as well. So some ways to have maybe a more enjoyable or positive eating experience around the holidays and in general, so this works for any time. One, I think, is food guilt. So this is a common thing that I hear, clients and individuals experiencing throughout the year, but definitely around the holidays. And I think it's just because, again, there's a lot more foods at the holidays, a lot more cookies and desserts and really specialty items. So we tend to feel maybe or experience even more guilt around food during this time. And something that can really help with this is starting to recognize our thoughts around food. So we typically experience food guilt when we are maybe labeling or categorizing foods and thinking about foods as like good or bad, better or worse for us. And so it can be really helpful to start to think about, in your experience, what's happened when you ate a food that you thought was quote unquote bad, right? Typically what happens is we might eat that food really, really quickly, don't even really taste it, enjoy it. And then we typically fall into that all or nothing mentality of like, well, I already had one sugar cookie, so I might as well eat the other ones. So it's usually not a very enjoyable eating experience. And then afterwards, we oftentimes get that guilt and shame, right? We tend to think, great, that I didn't have enough willpower. I'll do something different tomorrow. And this is really where the food guilt is coming from, because we are attaching morality to food. We're saying that we are good or bad based on what we eat. And this is just not true, right? Like we're not superior or inferior based on how we're eating or what we eat. So some ways to kind of manage or decrease food guilt is starting to recognize, do you label, categorize foods? How can we look at food as more neutral? So they aren't better or worse for you, but just kind of on a more level playing field. And we can still acknowledge 100% that foods are different nutritionally, right? So if you compare a sugar cookie to an apple, they are going to have very different nutrients, micronutrients, all sorts of things. But one is maybe not necessarily better or worse for you. And the more we can kind of think of food as more on that even keel, we start to decrease that emotional charge that sugar cookie might hold over us, where when we are eating it, it's not an enjoyable experience. We're eating more of it and then beating ourselves up afterwards, which is much more damaging and harmful, that guilt and shame that follow. So starting to think about labels, starting to change our thoughts around food, and just being curious, like what foods, what way of eating helps us to feel good. We can really start to cue in and find what foods make us feel energized, like what way of eating works best for us if we start to take notice of that. And kind of as I mentioned earlier, that deprivation mindset, even if we are still eating and eating a variety of things, if we're still anticipating come January 1st that we are going to get rid of all sweets, that can really kind of trigger this part of us that is seeking those out and then eating them, typically in a more uncomfortable way versus just eating what sounds good until feeling satisfied. And this is also something too of like going, again, this would be more pre-COVID, but if you were going to like an event and you'd kind of tell yourself like, I can only eat one cookie or one dessert, that kind of triggers that mindset as well. So doing things like chewing your food, taking time when you're eating, using things like mindful eating practices, this all helps as well to really have a satisfying meal or eating experience. So the more we can be in the moment, chewing our food, tasting our food, we also find that we just get more satisfied and we typically don't need to keep seeking out or eating more types of foods. So I know this is really hard and there's a lot of distractions that are just in our days, often when we're eating, on the computer, on our phones. So this is where the more we can practice this, it just is helpful overall. All right, so some tips and tricks in general around this time of year. So one of my main recommendations is eating throughout the day. I know with, there's a lot of reasons why this can kind of get mixed around, but if we kind of are going really long periods of time without eating, that can also kind of lead us to eat more and eat kind of more like less balanced types of foods. So the more we can kind of eat consistently throughout the day, get consistent energy in, the better we're going to feel, and the more we're going to be able to kind of not go into a meal with like low blood sugar and feeling really hungry, when we tend to kind of crave more of those like high carb, high fat types of foods. And this is also where eating things like balanced meals is really helpful. So having a protein at a meal, having some fiber at a meal, all of those types of things really help. So we're having sustained energy. If we're eating, like I think a great example is for breakfast. A lot of people tell me that they eat just the oatmeal packet and they're like, I don't know why I'm hungry, an hour or so later. And it's because it's just carbs in that oatmeal packet, which is great. You have carbs, you have fiber, but that's not really going to sustain your kind of hunger and energy levels for more than an hour, hour and a half. So if you have that oatmeal and you add some Greek yogurt, you add some berries, you add that protein, you add that fiber, that's actually going to help. So you're going to have much more consistent energy levels and feel satisfied longer. So that's where just kind of looking at meal components can be helpful to make sure that you're getting the energy that you need to kind of sustain you. And then also, the more we can eat, less ultra processed foods, more foods from home. I know a lot of us have cooking fatigue with COVID, so we're all in this together, but the more we can eat foods at home, even stuff that's kind of like pre-packaged, like I'm a huge fan of Trader Joe's. Their stuff is pretty good quality and is going to be definitely just much more nutritious from a standpoint of providing us with more of that fuel and energy and nutrients. So again, that can be a really easy place to look at, just giving you better energy through the day. And then having foods available, right? It's hard to make balanced choices and when we don't have things available. So consistent grocery shopping or getting food items delivered definitely helps. So we have choices, we have options, we have things available when we need it. I'm also a big fan of like packing snacks. So I know right now we're probably not going out much, but after COVID, even if you're out just running errands, having like a snack or something even in your bag or your car can also be helpful. So you're not finding yourself ravenous and then just like kind of grabbing whatever is most convenient as well. So those little things can just help keep us feeling typically better, have more energy, less reliant on more of the convenience types of foods. And with that, that's as we're taking those extra little steps. We will talk more about meal planning in a future presentation, but having a plan, planning for the week ahead, using shortcuts to prepare meals can be really helpful, especially with the COVID or the cooking fatigue. Things like the Instant Pot, Crock Pot are really great. You can throw all those ingredients in. Crock Pot, you let it sit for like 6 to 8 hours, and Instant Pot, you can cook things in like 20-ish minutes. So those really help. Typically, you only have to wash just the container part. So definitely helps with the washing of dishes and things. And same with like sheet pan meals, just putting all of your ingredients on a sheet pan, cook that all, less cleanup, much easier kinds of things. And then too, like I said, Trader Joe's, I'm a huge fan of, Sprouts, Whole Foods, they all have it too, but you can get really awesome meals where you can kind of just throw stuff together, or even use kind of their frozen meals that are definitely going to help, especially for those nights when you don't feel like cooking, which we all experience. So again, that can just help us in terms of maybe making, having more of the food from home versus relying on more of the convenience types of foods more of the time. Right, so that's kind of food, eating, nutrition, and we'll talk a little bit about immune function since Obviously, we want to keep our immune system up and as optimal as we can, especially just in these next few weeks. So one thing to note is our immune system, immune function is impacted by so many different things. So what we eat can definitely impact our immune system, but also things like adequate sleep, stress relief, and even our gut health all have an impact on our immune system. So it's important to note that you could be eating really great and getting all these essential vitamins and minerals and nutrients, but if you're not sleeping great, then that's still going to impact your immune system really negatively. So we kind of got to look at the big picture at all those different areas. So a couple specific nutrients that are really helpful for immune function is vitamin C. This is definitely, I think, one of the most common ones we associate with our immune function, and for good reason. Typically, vitamin C, again, we think of like oranges, or at least I think of oranges and citrus fruits, but there's also a really good amount of vitamin C in strawberries and bell peppers and even broccoli. So definitely trying to incorporate these at different meals is going to really be optimal in terms of getting that vitamin C. And then zinc is also another important nutrient for immune function. These are found in slightly different food sources. So you'll see animal proteins, shellfish are actually a great source of zinc, but even things like pumpkin seeds, beans, and whole grains are all really helpful and great sources of zinc. And then vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually a hormone, but we have seen documented links that low levels of vitamin D is associated with decreased immune function. So there's not a ton of food sources of vitamin D. There's some things that have some added vitamin D to it, but sun exposure is another place we can get more vitamin D. But if we are deficient, usually that's where a supplement is really helpful and necessary to boost those levels. So speaking of supplements, this is a question I get asked about a lot when it comes to our immunity. And really the research only supports that supplementation, so taking it in a supplement form, is only really going to be helpful if a deficiency is present. So if you do have low levels of vitamin D or low levels of zinc, then absolutely taking a supplement to get those to a normal level is going to be really helpful. But taking in vitamin D or extra zinc, especially in a supplement form because they're such high dose, really isn't going to offer any benefit. And sometimes excessive amounts of certain nutrients can also lead to worsening immune function or even liver issues. So we just kind of want to be cautious and aware of what we're taking, why we're taking it, how long we're taking it for. And as always, the more we can get these things from food is always better than supplements. But again, if you are deficient, have absorption issues, there can be a host of reasons why we might not be able to get adequate amounts from food. So that's where supplementation is really necessary in order to get those levels up. So you can ask your doctor to assess, especially vitamin D levels. Zinc and vitamin C, you can as well, but there's sometimes a little more different lab options depending on different situations. So just something to ask your doctor about if you're interested in getting those checked out. The other thing I want to note is vitamin C is another one that is often taken as emergency, the little packets. Typically, there's kind of a mixed consensus about whether or not that supplemental dosage is helpful for colds specifically. A lot of people will swear by it and say that the emergency really helps. And so far, the research is really inconclusive. They've kind of noted that in terms of prevention of a cold, that taking the emergency or supplemental vitamin C doesn't do anything in terms of preventing a cold, but there is mixed kind of research in terms of at onset of symptoms, if that does help. And it looks like, again, it's certain populations. Obviously, if you are deficient in vitamin C, you don't eat any of those foods, that's where it probably does help. but vitamin C is also a water-soluble vitamin. So taking excessive amounts, we're just gonna essentially get rid of it in our urine anyways. So just something to kind of consider with that one. Great. So another big part of immune system, immune function, and managing and living, healthy during the holidays and just in general is also just managing stress. We've all been under, a lot of stress this year, and I imagine it's just going to be ongoing for definitely the next kind of few weeks and months here moving forward. So some ways to help with this, one is just routine. So the more we can stick to consistency, I think helps, so we're not having to spend so much energy, time, effort trying to do things. So the more we can have routines is helpful. Moving your body, right? So we know the benefits of moving our body, of getting adequate movement. Obviously, with the new shutdown, we are much more limited and impacted. And so whether we can do things at home or in our neighborhoods, well, again, depending on how safe we feel with that, but even just walking, moving our bodies is definitely going to help overall, but also can be really helpful with managing sleep. As I mentioned, definitely necessary for immune function, stress. I know sleep has been another issue that throughout COVID has been a really challenging thing for a lot of people. So sleep hygiene can be helpful, trying to sleep at this similar time, getting up at a similar time, getting rid of phones, blue screens, tablets, all that light, especially within like an hour before sleeping, really messes with kind of our circadian rhythms. So definitely things to just consider if you are having trouble sleeping. Those are some ways to help try to work on that sleep hygiene. And then finding and incorporating de-stressful activities. So hopefully we're not completely burnt out on hobbies or things that bring us joy, but trying to do those types of things, whether that's baking, painting, taking pictures, like whatever it is, still trying to make time for that and find things that are joyful, to making time for connection, whether that's virtual for of most of our things now these days, but still trying to, again, do those things that help to bring us as joy, especially in these times when a lot of us are probably going to have a very altered holiday time. So lastly, a couple other things, holidays are going to be different for a lot of us. We're obviously not doing stuff mostly with other individuals. Some of us might not be seeing anyone at all. So it's totally, we want to acknowledge that there's a lot of feelings that can come up, especially sadness, frustration, that things look so different this year. But it is a time too where you can try new traditions. So maybe there's something you've always wanted to do. Maybe you don't want to cook at all, or maybe you want to have certain things. Maybe you want to try a family recipe. Maybe you want to, I don't know, whatever it is. This is kind of a time too where we might get to actually spend more time doing things that we actually want to do and really look forward to, because we don't have as many social engagements as we might normally have.
Well, they're schooling from home.
And then, as I mentioned too, kind of what are the things that bring you joy during this time of year, finding ways to still enjoy being at home. I know a lot of us are obviously back at home for even longer. And then, so to kind of summarize, try to continue those normal healthy habits as much as possible. Again, getting adequate sleep, movement, eating, all of that is going to be really helpful. Managing stress, trying to find and make time for those things that bring you joy. Try to avoid the fad diets before, during, after. I know there's usually a ton of marketing that goes out now until the new year. So it can be really alluring, but again, as I kind of mentioned, typically isn't going to be really helpful and it can be more detrimental. Thinking about your thoughts, relationship with food, especially if that is something that's really challenging for you this time of year. Learning to say no, declining food, as well as giving yourself that permission to say yes. So a little bit of both. And really savor, enjoy what you're eating, especially if it's those things that we really do only kind of get this time of year as well. So I just always like to, keep in mind that health is not, one meal or one day or one week. It's really kind of a culmination of all health and eating behaviors in general that we're doing over the long run. So so you have my contact, my email. I also do weekly Facebook Lives on the UCSD Recreation Facebook page, so you can definitely join there. And all of they're all recorded, and then you can access all of the recorded ones on YouTube. And then there's also the UCSD Rec Playground, which is all free. You just have to essentially make an account, but there's access to free live and recorded classes, like drawing classes. There's yoga, there's meditation, boot camp, all things that you can do at home. So definitely an awesome resource if you haven't already checked it out. Alrighty. So I know I went through that very quickly, but definitely let me know if you have any questions. You can definitely put them in the chat box, and let me know if there's anything that I can help with. And I know I'll be coming back again in February to talk about the psychology of eating, a lot more about kind of how we think about food, our relationship with food as well. So definitely another one after the holiday season.
Erin, thanks so much for that. You mentioned some of the ready-made foods at Trader Joe's, and I just want to put a plug in for their super burritos, which are made with quinoa and sweet potato. They are absolutely fabulous. And what's the other? And Peruvian something, but they are really, really good and super healthy. So, if anybody's looking in Trader Joe's, they're in their ready-made thing. You just pop it in the microwave, and it's a great, low-calorie, low-guilt lunch.
Yeah, I would say, all of their stuff tastes great and is budget friendly, and like you said, you can just heat things up. It's super easy and delicious, and they have so many great things. I use a lot of their frozen fruits and vegetables too to add into things as well, because then they're not going to go bad. You can just throw it into whatever you're making. They even have frozen stir-fry vegetables.
Yes.
I'll add that to frozen brown rice, which I can heat up and then just grab a sauce that they have.
We've shopped at both at Whole Foods and Sprouts and at Trader Joe's, and we find much better, easy to prepare healthy food at Trader Joe's.
I agree.
Much more.
Yeah. I'm not getting paid by them. I wish I was,
I know.
but I do endorse their products as well. Yes.
Yeah. We have a question from Ron. Ron, go ahead. Yeah. Ron, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, a couple questions. You brought up immune system. So do you have suggestions about how do we know under this current environment, having a strong immune system is pretty critical, and exercise and diet can help, but how can we gauge the strength of our immune system? Are there tests that we can request from our doctor to ascertain the current strength of our immune system? And then I'll have a second question. I'll let you respond to that. And I have another question.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So to my knowledge to date, there isn't any lab test that can tell us our immune function. I'm sure that's going to be happening at some point. That would be super helpful. So I'd say it's kind of as of now, it's like you said, kind of looking at how is your sleep, How are you eating? How's your physical activity, movement? I would say if you're feeling really stressed, you're feeling really exhausted, you can probably guess your immune system is probably on the lower end of that. So that would be like my kind of way to gauge. Obviously, most of us are social distancing. So pre-COVID, you might also be able to be someone that finds you get colds frequently or gets illnesses easily as well. But hopefully, fingers crossed, no one's experiencing any of that with all of our social distancing and keeping safe. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, prior to COVID, I was a member of campus recreation. I've kind of lost contact. Can you describe, I assume that there's online activity. Are those classes available to campus members, or do you still have to be a member of campus? You have to have a membership with campus recreation.
Great question. Yeah, and someone else just put in the chat about how to access that. So I just added the link into the UCSD Rec Playground. So luckily, everything that Rec is offering is free. So you don't have to be a member, you don't have to pay anything. You get access to the live videos. So you'll get those like live Zoom streams of different classes. And there also are pre-recorded, so you can do it at your own schedule, pause as needed, which is kind of nice sometimes. Okay. But yeah, you just go in and you'll just make an account, and then you have access to everything. It'll give you a little password that changes every quarter. So that's kind of essentially just, we'll get that, and then you use that to access everything.
I have an account. I've just not used it for a while, but you said both the live online classes and classes that can be streamed at any time are available on that playground website?
Yep. Yeah, okay. It's all kind of housed within the playgrounds. Yeah, so you can access the live and the pre-recorded. And there's other things too. There's like drawing classes. So it's not just movement, but there's a lot of yoga, and I think there's like boot camp and dance classes. So there's a lot. And I feel like there's at least 6 to 8 classes offered every day live. So there's a pretty big array of options available.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. You know, we're all much more limited, especially with the colder weather. So yeah. Any other questions? You can definitely raise your hand or put them in the chat box, or
just jump in there. There aren't that many of us on this. What's your favorite holiday treat that's not bad for you?
I don't know. I would say I enjoy cooking and baking, so I do like making like a variety of things. What was the one? I always like the peanut butter cookies with like the Hershey Kiss on them.
Oh yeah.
The peanut butter blossoms. I always like those.
Wow, that sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a fun one. And there's a lot of like peppermint stuff out this time of year. Mm-hmm. Always delicious as well. So yeah, trying different things.
See Millie's question, what foods help with knee problems?
Yes. So I would say for a lot of us with pain or things like that, there's not a lot, unfortunately, food-wise that we can really do. But I will say if it's kind of secondary to inflammation, you know, this is where eating more anti-inflammatory types of foods is helpful. So this is where eating fruits and vegetables, eating, you know, salmon has the omega-3s, which we always hear about. So the more that we're eating foods that are more in that whole unprocessed form are going to typically kind of help a little bit in some ways, but unfortunately for a lot of like the arthritis and joint pain, you know, food in and of itself can't really do a whole lot with that. But I would say the more that we're eating more whole foods, less unprocessed foods, that will maximize like our nutrients for wound healing and trying to help decrease inflammation and things like that.
So then a supplement would be something you should use for the knee problem.
It's going to depend because a lot of supplements out there are really not tested in like randomized controlled trials, and really so you kind of have to do your research on what specifically is it like, is it an inflammation thing, is it an arthritis thing, is it
Cosamia, I think it's called. It's sold in Costco for the knees. Cosamia, I'm not sure of the name.
glucosamine?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that one has been I think more heavily researched than others in terms of yeah, like knee and joint pain. I'm not super familiar with it, so I can look more into it and get back to you. I'll have
Okay.
that. It's my
Thank
homework for next time.
All right.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I want to thank you very much, Erin, for being with us and for sharing